The beginning of the rise didn't look like the beginning of a rise. Not far from the tiny country of El Salvador's capital city, San Salvador, is a smaller city, Santa Tecla.
Maybe this will explain it.
And not far outside of Santa Tecla is the tiny coffee town of Nuevo Cuscatlán. Though only a 7-mile, 12-kilometer drive from San Salvador, this 7,000-person city feels far away from the busy capital. And it was here in 2012 where 2,754 voters put their faith in a young, business-savvy political newcomer for mayor, defeating the Conservative Party opposition by the slimmest of margins, just 169 votes.
Wait.
But such a narrow margin didn't dim the young Nayib Bukele's ambition. While he ran with the leftist FMLN, Bukele's campaign from the very beginning focused less on party lines and more on purpose. A confident, energetic 30-year-old bent on snuffing out crime and corruption and investing in education, infrastructure, and community development. Today, the marks of Bukele's time as mayor are hard to miss in Nuevo Cuscatlán. First came education. Upon taking office, Bukele announced he'd forfeit his salary so could instead help fund a scholarship program. In that year, Nuevo Cuscatlán's illiteracy rate stood at about 15%. With the launch of a citywide reading program, Salvadoran press celebrated that in 2015, the city was free of illiteracy, making it the third town in the department to reach the mark and moving it well ahead of the national average. The other metric that Bukele would go on to tout in future campaigns was that while he was in office, Nuevo Cuscatlán only saw a single homicide. While the exact number was disputed, the exceptionally low homicide rate was a major point of pride, as the country has been fighting the violent and entrenched MS-13 and Barrio 18 gangs since the end of its civil war in 1992. It's been an uphill battle against the hyper-violent and incredibly cruel gangs since Bukele was a teenager, so no matter how relatively safe the small town was to begin with, in a country with a legacy of gang violence, such a safety record was as much an accomplishment as education for the young mayor. The other successes of Bukele's office were more tangible. At the end of 2012, the city opened its first 24/7 medical clinic. Moving fast and not worried about how the city would pay for things, ground broke on a new library, and the city embarked on a multi-million-dollar water project that would make drinking water available 24 hours a day rather than the meager 3 hours available previously. In 3 years, Nuevo Cuscatlán went from an unexceptional provincial town to exemplary. If politicians just took bold action, the town proved, things could change for the better of everyone. At the same pace that the city changed, the leader of the transformation went from unheard of to the next big thing. Prior to politics, Bukele's career had made stops in consulting and political advertising for the party he now represented. Now, as a politician himself, he made the most of his professional experience. No good deed would go unclaimed or underreported. If infrastructure and education projects didn't sell Salvadorans on the small-town mayor's standing as a politician for the people, perhaps the YouTube channel would. Here he posted clips of his interviews and debates that aired over local television. But he didn't stop at just getting his message out. He used the platform to further an image of a man firmly for the people, posting videos of him moving through the town, talking with kids, celebrating the launch of the medical center, and answering questions from the community. The brand building wasn't confined to the internet either. On everything that the mayor touched, the library, the hospital, the signs at city limits and construction sites alike, and the podiums from which he spoke, was now a light blue N, which replaced the city's prior logo and highlighted the positive transformations directly connected to Nayib Bukele's term. The project worked.
There's gotta be a catch somewhere.
He remade the city, and in doing so, built a personal image as a champion of the people, unafraid to greenlight big projects and take big swings. While mayor for only a single 3-year term, journalists now visiting years on are hard-pressed to find a single person in Nuevo Cuscatlán that has a bad thing to say about him. While Bukele's time as mayor was transformative, it was also short. Bigger things beckoned as both he and the FMLN recognized that the new guy with bold ideas and a record so sterling had huge potential in a political environment dominated by aging voices of the civil war that had ended decades ago. The logical progression was the mayor's office of the nation's capital, an office that would garner more attention and potentially position the ascendant politician for a presidential run. While San Salvador dwarfs Nuevo Cuscatlán, Bukele took a similar approach. He built a new library, reinvigorated old shopping markets, invested in infrastructure, spent serious money, and signed off on glitzy vanity projects to ensure his image rose.
Bro, I don't know what you're talking about. This is your homeless population increasing, Mexico, brother, this is El Salvador, it's not in Mexico. What?
Along with the cities. Salvadorans followed, and his popularity continued to rise. Nationally, though, other trends were on the rise in equal proportion. By the time Bukele took office, a truce between MS-13, Barrio 18, and the national government had recently collapsed. In 2 years, homicide rates had more than doubled, and by 2015, the country was seeing an average of 18 homicides a day, while its 103 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants had ballooned to the world's worst rate.
Jesus.
At the very same time, the nation's prisons were beginning to overflow as the federal government leaned back into heavy-handed gang policies that threw more and more gang-affiliated Salvadorans behind bars. From 2010 to 2016, the country's total prison population grew by more than 11,000, while the incarceration rate hit 579, far outpacing any other Central American country and nearing the top of the list globally. While Nayib Bukele
what the fuck?
American country and nearing the top of the list.
The incarceration rate's at, bro, USA is at 693 per 100,000. Hello? Hello? Yo, America, fix your shit, man. Fix your shit, motherfucker. My goodness, man. These are a bunch of fucking bums.
Globally. While Nayib Bukele's name recognition was expanding and image as a big idea reformer was sharpening, the country was crumbling. Gangs killed dispassionately, while the government arrested citizens indiscriminately. Salvadorans were nothing short of desperate for change, as the threat of gang violence now impacted every aspect of everyday life. Old politicians and old policies just weren't enough anymore. A lane emerged. For decades, El Salvador's politics effectively ran as a two-party system. It was FMLN or it was ARENA. No serious candidate would even consider running for high office without aligning themselves with one of the two. But despite surging popularity, Bukele's support from FMLN, his party was waning as he constantly broke rank and strayed from their platform, so in response, he was failing to get the votes of his own party members for some of his mayoral ambitions. They became the barrier to his goals. This quickly devolved into a vicious cycle of one criticizing the other and vice versa, before finally, Bukele gave them an excuse to get rid of him. FMLN officials alleged that he called their lawyer a bruja, a derogatory term that roughly translates to witch. This, and its violation of their ethics policies, was the reason given for his expulsion from FMLN, but all understood that it was heavily, if not entirely predicated by his increasingly distant and hostile relationship with the party. The fallout with FMLN took Bukele off what appeared a predestined path towards the presidency. He clearly couldn't join ARENA, the opposition, and without either support, precedent suggested a successful presidential run was impossible. But regardless, he forged on. Wanting to form his own party, but unable to in time for the upcoming election, Bukele teamed up with the Grande Alianza por la Unidad Nacional, meaning his incredibly long-shot presidential run could begin. Both traditional nominees, backed by the traditional parties, ran traditional campaigns, rotating between TV appearances, radio interviews, and stump speeches about why they'd be the best person to put at the helm of the Salvadoran political system. Bukele, meanwhile, argued that the system itself was the problem. He promised to gut the establishment and its corruption, largely delivering this message through Facebook.
He was biased. Bro, this guy, Wendover, usually does pretty good at being biased. A lot of times the things look biased because of a lack of time. It would take a lot to explain the history behind it.
On Twitter, attaining skyrocketing engagement.
He does decent a lot of times.
His few physical campaign events more closely resembled parties as he hosted dressed like a Silicon Valley CEO, not a suited presidential candidate. As election day neared, polls trended increasingly towards his direction, and so confident in his position, he didn't even show up to the debates, unwilling to even engage with the mainstream political candidacy system. It may have been risky, but it worked. The FMLN candidate attained 14.4% of the vote, the ARENA one 31.7%, and Nayib Bukele, the 37-year-old outsider, commanded 53.1%.
Wait, that means he gets majority. Dude, wait, chat, at the time, was that a new party, chat? Or they had already, like, Chat, is that a completely new party? Or had they gotten support over like in other years by small numbers or whatever? That sounds fucking insane. Dude, that sounds fucking insane. Because it takes a long time usually to start getting votes on a new party. It's usually like, at least in Canada and shit, like we had like the NDP, and a lot of people like the NDP, but don't even vote for it because they know they can't win.
A decisive victory that the almost inevitable runoff wasn't even necessary. On June 1st, 2019, Bukele assumed office and became the 43rd president of the Republic of El Salvador.
NDP, NP, don't give a fuck.
Change came quick. In the days that followed, Bukele unveiled his so-called territorial control plan. The plan that would transform El Salvador from one of the most dangerous countries in the world to one where people could simply go outside without fear. It reportedly had 6 phases. People could simply go outside.
Dude, some of those look fucking bussin'.
Without fear. It reportedly had 6 phases, with a 7th to be implemented only if the rest didn't work. Each phase was only unveiled at its start, but the first started just 20 days into his presidency and was dubbed Preparation. It comprised a surge of police and military into 12 of the country's most dangerous communities, ones that were effectively gang-held territory, along with initiating a state of emergency in the nation's prisons, prohibiting visitors and calls so that incarcerated gang leaders could no longer communicate. Essentially, the idea was to just start. To use the resources on hand to do what they could to start to fracture gang structures. The next phase was opportunity. Perhaps as a way to foster public support before the more heavy-handed phases to come, this second step involved using a $91 million loan from the Central American Bank for Economic Integration to invest in community centers, skate parks, schools, and other services that would work to prevent young people from joining gangs in the first place. But phase 3 was where things got.
It's crazy how high impact such quote-unquote low amounts can be in struggling communities. Like, it's insane how much, I know it's all politics, whatever, but the amount that the US funds a bunch of dumb shit for like billions on billions, and you see like 100 whatever mil does that much for a community like that. It's insane. Like,
tricky.
In terms of like ratio of actual impact, that's like incredible impact.
The name was modernization, and the idea was to buy the country's national security forces some $109 million in equipment. Drones, helicopters, guns, everything they'd need to fight an all-out war with the gangs. The only roadblock to implementing this was that the $109 million loan, again from the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, would have to be approved by the country's Legislative Assembly. The Legislative Assembly, however, was formed by an election in March 2018, almost a year before Bukele's election, long before he could influence an outcome. Therefore, the Legacy Arena and FMLN parties held 53 of the 84 seats, a firm majority, while Bukele's adoptive party, Ghana, had just 10. Essentially, in order to do anything, including get this $109 million loan, the president had to appeal to the lawmakers from the 2 parties he had just convinced the entire country were the problem in his campaign.
Well, he wins majority elections and they get fucking 10 seats? What the fuck am I even looking at? I don't know how the system works.
Unsurprisingly, the parties pushed back, asking for more transparency on where funds would go, leaving the loan and phase 3 of Bukele's crucial territorial control plan deadlocked. This is where things got iffy. Supposedly, the president invoked one of the powers granted to him by the Constitution, Article 167, Part 7, which allowed the office holder to convene an extraordinary session of the Legislative Assembly when, quote, the interests of the Republic demand it. While vague, many questioned whether the lack of approval of a loan constituted an extraordinary situation worthy of an emergency legislative session. While lawmakers squabbled over whether this was a legal maneuver, and therefore whether they would attend the Sunday session, Bukele pushed back, saying it was their constitutional requirement and threatening them by publicly reminding everyone of Article 87. Article 87 of the Constitution states that people have the right to mount an insurrection if lawmakers fail to follow the Constitution, and therefore, Bukele implicitly asked his supporters to come to the Legislative Assembly prepared to overthrow the government. So they did, surrounding the building, but ultimately only
sounds legal. I mean, if there's a legal fucking clause for it, I mean, shit,
20 of 84 lawmakers showed up, far from the minimum needed to legally vote on legislation. Regardless, Bukele arrived, and not alone.
Yeah, Trump.
Marching into the
Trump, quote unquote, allegedly did this, but I don't think this is something in the U.S. fucking playbook that says if people fail the people, you can storm the Capitol, bro. They just don't say that.
Him were dozens of police and military personnel donned in military fatigues and armed with rifles. While they surrounded lawmakers, Bukele delivered a brief 10-minute speech demanding a return to what he considered constitutional order, furious that the majority of lawmakers disobeyed his dubious order. Now the key question was what—
Wait, hold on. I didn't catch that. Fuck, sorry.
With rifles. While they surrounded lawmakers, Bukele delivered a brief 10-minute speech demanding a return to what he considered constitutional order, furious that the majority of lawmakers disobeyed his dubious order. Now the key question was what this event actually was. Was it Bukele bringing in the army and police essentially as props? Visual devices to convey the importance of passing the legislation that would better equip them? Or was it a show of force? An implicit threat? A reminder to lawmakers that the guys with the guns were on his side, which they very much were, given the $109 million he was about to give them. While this series of events was quickly considered a constitutional crisis and critiqued the world over, distraction came quick as the COVID-19 virus reached El Salvador's borders. On March 21st, the president announced a mandatory nationwide lockdown with violators subject to detainment in special pandemic containment centers.
Jesus!
Almost immediately, potential legal issues arose. Some 70 people were arrested in the early hours of March 22nd before the details of the president's decree were even published. That is, arrested for violation of a law that wasn't even officially publicized. Others were arrested for not wearing masks, despite not yet being legally required, others still for traveling to jobs deemed essential by the decree itself. It was a constitutionally dubious law to begin with, but even then, it was applied arbitrarily and with problematically generous interpretation. In a matter of weeks, the Supreme Court struck the decree down, saying that detainment without due process could only happen in response to a suspicion that a person might be infected, not simply for violation of the lockdown.
Oh man, this is getting fucking all sorts of fucked up, man.
Bukele pushed back, building a loophole, saying that those found in violation of the lockdown would not be held for violation of the order itself, but rather under suspicion that they might be infected because they violated lockdown orders. Put another way, the Supreme Court made a ruling, then Bukele and the police just decided to ignore it. This storyline continued in 2021. On February 28th, the country voted in a new legislative assembly, and Nuevas Ideas, the new party founded by the president, decisively swept. This was no surprise. Through this all, Bukele was incredibly popular. Opinion polling hovered around 90% approval rating, making him one of, if not the most popular president in the world. His popularity translated to his party winning 56 of 84 seats. That's to say, they alone held a majority.
Yeah.
No longer would Bukele have to face the opposition of the majority of the legislature.
Wait, they don't even need to ask for support of other people, other parties, right? They could just get together, talk about shit they want to do, and just send it, yeah?
Of assembly. No longer would he need to concede to FMLA and Arena wishes. So just one major roadblock remained: the Supreme Court itself. Thanks to the new Nuevas Ideas majority, though, all it took was a vote. The president said the body was making arbitrary rulings that were impeding his ability to manage the pandemic, the national legislature voted to dismiss the 5 dissenting judges, and Bukele filled the bench with 5 new ones that would vote as he wished. Bukele now, by proxy, held all 3 branches of power: executive, legislative, and judicial, and with that he could do, well, just about anything he wanted.
Oh, wait, that's like North Korea. That's exactly the setup that they've been doing over the past whatever amount of decades, no? Isn't that how North Korea has it? Where he has like a bunch of dudes and he's like the dudes or whatever, and then they oh, is it China? It's China.
El Salvador's weekend of March 25th through 27th, 2022 was tragic. Nobody's exactly sure why, but the gangs were mad. Many speculate in response to the breakdown of a secret truce between them and the government, special treatment in jail in exchange for relative peace on the streets.
Whatever, then fuck you.
Whatever it was, some 87 seemingly random people were murdered, and Bukele was furious. Years of slow and steady progress, a small early sign of success of his territorial control plan, were reversed in just one weekend. So he went to the Legislative Assembly and they approved a 30-day so-called state of exception suspending constitutional rights. Police wouldn't have to tell people why they're being arrested, they wouldn't need to read them their rights, detainees wouldn't have a right to legal counsel, and they could be held for up to 15 days without seeing a judge. The state of exception paved the way for mass arbitrary detention. So that's exactly what came quick. Police and military swarmed gang strongholds, arresting any known members, but also arresting anyone who appeared that they could be in a gang. Tattoos by themselves were not—
I get it. They use that as a tool to, without like any like warrants or whatever, just storm everybody and just fucking get everybody while they can and be like, at least we got them now into custody, even if it's 15 days and then they extend it or whatever.
To get thrown in jail. Police were reportedly subject to daily arrest quotas and encountered little blowback for false arrests.
That's a loophole.
Pushing them to just arrest anyone that they could imagine being a gang member, regardless of facts or evidence. By midnight Sunday of that tragic weekend, some 600 people had been arrested. By the end of the week, 6,000. And now, 1 year on, with the state of exception having been renewed and renewed and renewed, nearly 70,000 suspected gang members have been detained. 2% of the nation's adult population is behind bars, in overcrowded prisons stuffed 3 or 4 times beyond capacity, waiting to make their way through an overburdened judicial system. Mothers and fathers still search in desperation for their arrested children, unable to track them down in the system even after a year, but increasingly they're being sent here.
Chab, they know how to fucking get public approval. Think about the public that live there, right? All they see is like 80 whatever people got killed or whatever. They see their local, like, let's say fucking family members getting killed, whatever, all this bloodshed, and then they see like a quote unquote solution, right? Even though it's not good, it's not like or like well done or perfect or whatever, they don't give a fuck. They don't give it's less violence, it's less of the people that get murdered. They don't, of course they're going to approve of this.
The brand new Terrorism Confinement Center. This facility was built at breakneck pace once the gang roundups began and opened for business in early 2023. I was right earlier than that. It was introduced to the nation through a highly choreographed, scripted, and produced 35-minute video tour with Bukele. Throughout, the video stressed the president's influence on the project, how his logic and smarts created a better system, and exhibited the scale of the security forces, thanks to Bukele, the quality of their equipment, thanks to Bukele, and the ultimate degree of control the government would have, thanks to Bukele. After all, the prison was capable of holding some 40,000 inmates, making it the largest prison in the world, a single facility capable of housing the population of a small country. The thing is, all of this worked. While in March 2022, the country averaged 4.8 homicides a day, a bump upwards over the year's average of 3.1, April, the first full month of the roundups, saw just 1.3. In May, the trend continued, just 0.5 homicides a day. In fact, since April 2022, not a single month encountered an average daily homicide count over 1. While some question the exact validity of the data, the broad truth is undeniable. El Salvador is as safe as it's been in decades.
I mean, no way the margins being misreported to amounts that like go way beyond
the first time in many residents' lifetimes, people can actually walk the streets, actually live life without fear. The feeling is freeing, life-changing. After decades of hopelessness, it's like living in a new nation, one with a better, brighter future. Bukele is as popular as he's ever been. The checks and balances of power may have been degraded, the judicial system may have broken down, thousands may be unjustly detained, but in the opinion of the vast majority of Salvadorans, the ends justify the means.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Polling shows Bukele's approval rating still around 90%, making him still perhaps the most popular president in the world. Elsewhere, however, his image is different.
I mean, you could debate this for a long time, but at the same time, it's really tough because people are they benefit from the like what this comes with, you know, like the positives, whatever. So I don't know.
Bukele has been condemned by just about
anyone
anyone
down
in the
from his
business
position
of condemning.
is like
the
impossible.
United Nations, Human Rights Watch, the US State Department, international media. Very few come to his support globally. All express concern for the backsliding from democracy. El Salvador is 9 months away from its next presidential elections, and Bukele has announced he's running. This is despite what Article 152 of the country's constitution reads. Quote, "The following shall not be candidates for the President of the Republic. He who has filled the presidency of the Republic for more than 6 months, consecutive or not, during the period immediately prior to or within the last 6 months prior to the beginning of the presidential period." This line was always interpreted to mean that one could not be president for 2 consecutive terms. Until 2021, when the newly overhauled Bukele-appointed Supreme Court reversed course, saying that consecutive terms would be allowed. Little legal justification was given, only that denying a second term to a popular president would be denying the will of the people. This is true. The people want Bukele to remain in power. He has seemingly solved the nation's biggest issue in a way that the people are supportive of. He's done the job he was democratically elected to do. Across every step in the process, he has retained the support of the people, even as he consolidated power across all 3 branches of government. He now has few, if any, legal checks on his power, considering he's able to modify or reinterpret the Constitution as he pleases. He is essentially a democratically elected dictator. The dissonance between the opinion of El Salvador and that of the rest of the world has...
I mean, one of the people that are around it, I mean, he can't do it all by himself. One of the people around him and in the seats or whatever, if he was to use this, like, with extreme bias and it was to be like deliberately doing dumb shit and weird shit, I mean, surely they wouldn't back it up. Surely.
An air of paternalism to it. It feels like the developed world is telling El Salvador that it knows best, that the Salvadoran people are incapable of making decisions for themselves. This dynamic has been a feature of the nation's relationship with the US in particular for decades. The superpower has long meddled with domestic Salvadoran politics. Much of the supposed international concern is
propaganda. I mean, that's what, like I said, like I'm interpreting the information I'm given when I'm making a take about the actual thing. I'm making a take about the video, which is, you have to make a distinction here. Okay, I'm making a take about the video based on what I'm given, which is flat out this. I haven't had all the history behind it because the other video presented some data that was against some of this.
Condescending feeling of impossibility that the country truly figured something out on its own. But a distinct other part of the concern is likely rooted in the more objective, rational, emotionless analysis people who didn't live through decades of warlike state are able to undertake. The potentially more accurate understanding of the sacrifices being made to solve the crippling crisis of gang violence. Leaders come and go. Even if Bukele is a perfect, benevolent dictator for life, he will eventually leave office, either democratically or through death. It is possible, even common, that checks and balances in a democratic system get in the way of progress. They make things slow, but they also make things methodical. It's through this process that decisions are properly vetted. It's a system of government designed to depend on the system itself rather than any particular individual. So it's a system of government that makes short-term sacrifices for the long-term gain. El Salvador, meanwhile, has flipped that on its head. It's putting all of its eggs in one basket and making long-term sacrifices for short-term gain. Maybe the people are right. Maybe it's a sacrifice worth making to solve the #1 issue holding the nation back. Or maybe the international observers are right. Maybe their perspective is valuable and the country truly is making a colossal mistake. But what's sure is that if it is a mistake, it's their mistake to make. As a sovereign nation,
sometimes, short-term gain can turn to long-term gain, right? If it dismantles all the very structured things and it dismantles like very elaborate systems or whatever, I mean, dude, that into the next generation will have a major impact.
The they will have to rebuild from the right to decide on their own, without international meddling, what they want to do, even if that means the democratic election of a dictator. The accessibility of smartphones these days has changed a lot, but one interesting thing I think it's changed most dramatically is what happens when we don't have something to do. If we're waiting for the subway or to pick someone, I think for their educational background as they have clear, concise explanations and then...
That was a good video. I enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too biased. Oh, I lived my early childhood there, but my mom lived there most of his life in fear. Yeah, I could see that.